Hello Internet, and welcome back to my series of film reviews. Last time we covered The Hunger Games. I promise I'll get to Catching Fire soon, but this is something I've been wanting to cover for a while. A cult classic film known as Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Released on August 13, 2010 in the United States, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is based on the Scott Pilgrim graphic novel series by Brian Lee O'Malley. It follows a 22-year-old slacker named Scott Pilgrim who is dating a 17-year-old high schooler named Knives Chow. Not the adorable Seanic the Hedgehog creatures called Chow wielding knives. Scott comes from Toronto, and he's the bass player for the band Sex Bomb. Soon, he falls for a girl named Ramona Flowers, and he slowly drifts away from Knives. But as soon as Scott and Ramona get to know each other, shit really hits the fan really fast when he's forced to fight her 7 evil exes. This winter, I'm going to be making a project that pays homage to this film called Seanic the Hedgehog vs. the World. It will follow a similar plot to this film, seeing that Seanic will be forced to fight Aurora's evil exes. And next month, in November, there's going to be an anime series on Netflix called Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, which I'm particularly looking forward to since Scott Pilgrim vs. the World has always been one of my favorite movies of all time, next to Captain America the Winter Soldier, The Batman, and Sonic the Hedgehog 2. This movie contains a billion references to retro video games, from the 8-bit Universal fanfare that plays in the beginning of the movie that should have made a comeback in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, but alas, it did not. There are also snippets that come from The Legend of Zelda, and even some sound effects from Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, I never saw this movie in theaters. I watched a trailer online, and it looked right up my alley. And when I went to Best Buy back in 2010, I found a DVD copy of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and I immediately bought it. And when I put it on, I immediately fell in love with it. And since then, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is what I consider to be one of my favorite movies of all time. This movie bombed at the box office, but it slowly became a cult classic that many people that I know, including your friendly neighborhood wolf boy, love with a passion. This movie stars Michael Cera as Scott Pilgrim, Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Ramona Flowers, and some other familiar faces like Chris Evans as Lucas Lee, Brandon Routh as Todd Ingram, Anna Kendrick as Scott's sister Stacy, Brie Larson as Scott's ex Envy Adams, Aubrey Plaza as Julie, Mae Whitman, the voice of Katara from Avatar The Last Airbender, as Roxy Richter, the younger brother of Macaulay Culkin as Scott's gay roommate Wallace Wells, and Jason Schwartzman as Gideon Graves. What I love most about Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is the fights with the evil exes, and the visual effects that were inspired by retro video games. Anyone who is a gamer would absolutely adore this film, even though it's based on a graphic novel and not a video game. But they did release a Scott Pilgrim video game later down the line. I won't really go into spoiler territory here, but if you've seen this movie, then you know the basic plot of my upcoming project, Seanic the Hedgehog vs. the World. But Scott breaks up with Knives, but she becomes so clingy and does everything she can to win Scott back. The exes explode into coins when they're defeated. Scott and Ramona have a little tension towards the middle of the movie in regards to Scott having to fight her psychotic exes. Ramona seems to get back with Gideon, and then the ultimate final battle of the Chaos Theater. Scott dies during the first battle, and he comes back to life with Awana, and thus, Gideon is defeated once and for all. It looks like we get a battle with Nega Scott towards the end, but nope! They just simply chat and walk it off, before Scott finally gets back with Ramona. This movie contains many different storytelling techniques, such as inspiration from not only video games, but comic books as well. Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse would later perfect the comic book feel, unlike 2003's Hulk. But it definitely worked in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. While I've never read the Scott Pilgrim graphic novels, this movie is very faithful to the source material, unlike most other films out there. I'm giving Scott Pilgrim vs. the World a 10 out of 10. This has always been not only one of my favorite comic book films of all time, but one of my favorite movies period. It's way up there with Captain America the Winter Soldier, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, The Batman, and The Lord of the Rings. This movie features great performances from its cast, who will make a comeback in the upcoming Netflix series Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. When I heard that the original cast was returning for the Netflix series, I got very excited, because Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, like I said, is one of my absolute favorite films of all time. The action was great, the effects were great, and it actually feels like I was watching not only a video game coming to life, but also visually, it looks like this movie came straight from the Scott Pilgrim comic books. Stay tuned for my upcoming review of Catching Fire coming soon, as well as Mockingjay Part 1, Mockingjay Part 2, and The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And of course Sonic and Sonic's reviews of The Marvels, and Sonic Superstars. And all my upcoming projects like Sonic and Sonic Go Golden Eagle's Wedding, Seanic the Hedgehog vs. the World, and my upcoming retelling of Sonic Frontiers coming soon. Till then, I'll see you all next time.